What are emotions and why are they so powerful? Emotions are quite hard to explain or describe because, much like colors, they're experiential, and thus they often have cyclical definitions, meaning that pretty much the only way to define emotion is through the use of synonyms. For example, sadness is defined as a feeling of unhappiness or sorrow. And much like colors, if for whatever reason someone hadn't experienced a particular emotion, it would be impossible to describe. And because emotions are impossible to describe, they are almost entirely impossible to show without the use of empathy. This is why actors in films are applauded for their ability to make the audience empathize with their character. But sometimes a story will find a unique way to portray the indescribable, and few stories do that as well as Mob Psycho 100. Pretty much every shonen anime uses a character's strong emotions as a catalyst for a power up, making emotions tie loosely to a character's strength. But in Mob Psycho 100, our main character's emotions are tied directly to his strength. But what makes Mob Psycho stand out beyond that is the fact that our main character is not trying to use these emotions to become more powerful. Rather, it's that his emotions are too powerful. It takes an offensively realistic look at the human condition and the power that emotions can have over us. Mob Psycho 100 follows the life of Shigeo Kageyama, aka Mob, as he tries to balance his life as a young adolescent boy and his part time job as a psychic esper, working for a con artist pretending to be a psychic. Along the way, exercising evil spirits and fighting other espers who want to use their powers for evil. Mob is a quiet, shy, impressionable young boy, but he also has incredible psychic powers. But due to the nature of them, Mob has a complicated relationship with these powers. Mob's powers, and thus his emotions, are something he questions if he should be ashamed of. He hides them, pushes them down deep inside of himself, and he bottles them up. But these emotions always wind up exploding, hurting both people and or his relationships with them. It's something that I related to so much that I often felt as if I was watching a show depicting my own life. Not that many events that took place in the story were particularly relatable, but Mob's emotions, thought processes, and self image were so blatantly human it was hard not to see myself in him. From Mob's perspective, emotions are a bad and dangerous thing. They're not things to be shared, they're things to be hidden. Emotions make him hurt people, and so for the sake of others, he should show them as little as possible. Mob is a very complex character despite not seeming like it initially. He's a character that you have to spend time with and get to know before he'll open up to you. But that's not unintentional. Mob's name, as mentioned previously, is actually Shigeo Kageyama. But he gets this nickname, Mob, because of his lack of presence. He blends into the mob, he doesn't stand out. There's no reason for you to think that he's special at first glance. Mob is insecure, quiet. He doesn't know how to express himself to others, and because of these oddities in Mob's personality, he hasn't found it easy to connect with kids his age. Growing up, Mob showed his powers to pretty much any kid that would watch, but his unique powers and abilities caused the other kids to ostracize him. Even the thing that allowed him to express himself, his source of strength, became a point of insecurity for him. But obviously, Mob is a very powerful and unique individual. His psychic powers are almost godlike. He's one of those characters where if he wanted to take over the world, he very easily could. And he's not even 15 yet. But the thing that stops him is his empathy. Mob just isn't that kind of person. When Mob was young, there was an incident he was involved in where it's implied that he hurt his younger brother. It was because of this incident that Mob realized his powers were associated with his emotions and he decided to stop showing them entirely. Mob carries this guilt with him, and the effect that it had on his younger self and the development of his personality is depressingly clear. But luckily for us and our protagonist, this is a story about change and acceptance. It's a story that tells us that we can learn to accept the things that we're insecure about, and we can control the things that can all too often feel like they control us. And it was seeing Mob struggle with his identity and perception of himself that made me realize just how complex of a character he actually was. I'm not sure about you guys, but while I don't have psychic powers, I too have often found myself questioning if the things that make me unique are things I should be ashamed of or not. I, much like Mob, have struggled to figure out if the ways that I express myself and the talents that I have are things that I should be proud of, all because I express them around the wrong people. And beyond others' perception of me and the influence I've allowed that to have over my life, I've also screwed up and hurt people. I've reacted emotionally to people I love and have damaged those relationships. I'm a passionate person, and while I do view that as a positive thing generally, it can also lead to negative effects when I get too passionate about the wrong things. The reason I bring any of this up is because I don't think this is exclusive to me, or at least the relatability of this show isn't. Emotions are a very human thing, but unfortunately, so are flaws. Throughout the course of the show, we see Mob's emotional journey as he struggles to accept himself and the powers he has. He has a younger brother named Ritsu, and they both envy each other. Mob envies Ritsu because of his regular life, his popularity, and his general successes. Even their parents seemingly favor Ritsu because he's a more normal kid. Ritsu obviously envies Mob's powers, something that seems unattainable to him. These things together have made Ritsu sort of scared of Mob and his abilities, so he plays this role of the perfect brother to not upset Mob. And Mob is scared of himself and views himself as a threat to his younger brother. They both feel inadequate when comparing themselves to each other, but in the same way, they both look up to each other. They both love and care about each other, but they both find it hard to express that. But as the distance between differences close, they begin to connect more like brothers. They begin to see each other as role models for their weaknesses and strive to match the other, becoming the best versions of themselves that they can possibly be. They also find themselves developing some empathy for the other as they get closer to achieving the things they were previously envious of. Ritsu eventually does get psychic powers, and upon realizing his powers, he immediately becomes a villainous figure. These powers overtake him, and he feels unstoppable. But after some guidance from his brother, he quells those temptations and realizes just how much responsibility his brother has. And as Mob begins getting popular and begins developing socially, he begins realizing how tedious and annoying that can actually be. But he also begins realizing just how much work Ritsu has put into achieving that. Their envy grows into respect, and by the end of the show, while Mob is still the stronger Esper and Ritsu is still more socially adept, the distance between each other is much smaller now, and they can begin to relate to each other much more. Discipline is often the deciding factor between improvement and complacency, and we watch Mob's journey from complacency with his situation and powers to realizing the flaws he has and striving to correct them. He does this by going out of his comfort zone and trying to exercise and make new friends. The dichotomy between Mob's supernatural powers and every other aspect of his relatively normal life exists so that we as the viewer can see a character who is comically weak and socially inept and still look up to him. Mob Psycho 100's outlandish visuals and insane set pieces are merely a masquerade of a much deeper and grounded character study. Mob Psycho 100 is a story that encourages self control as well as self acceptance, but discourages self pity and complacency. It's a story about growth and maturity. Mob has been told so many times that the things that make him special are the things he should be ashamed of. It's a lie that is not only perpetuated by the people around him, but by himself. He's been told and has told himself these lies so many times that it's turned into his identity. By the end of the show, it reaches a point where he literally views himself as having two different sides of himself, the good side and the bad side. And while this may be true to some extent, in that all humans have the ability to be kind or mean, he compartmentalizes his emotions. viewing his non-emotional side as his quote-unquote good side and his emotional side as his quote-unquote bad side. We all have flaws and can have negative emotions and reactions, but we have to accept those things before we can begin working on them. Hiding them and pretending they don't exist will only ensure that they never change. Mob Psycho 100 is a constant battle of self-control. It's a battle for Mob to not lose to his thoughts and anxiety, and it's a battle to not lose to lies told by people who don't understand you. Speaking of battles, Studio Bones really went all out for some of these fights, but it's not only the excellent animation that made me fall in love with some of these fights, but it was the deeper meaning in all of them that elevated them above most fights I've seen in anime. For example, during my second favorite arc in the show, Mob gets trapped in his mind and struggles for what feels like months as his brain tries to convince him that the world is a terrible place and that all the people around him hate him. He struggles to not begin feeling jaded and cold to the people around him. It's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Anxiety can kill relationships, and our brains have a very powerful ability to make situations seem worse and worse the more we think about them. And if you asked me to describe or show you how it feels to fight off those feelings and lies of anxiety, well, I'd probably say it feels something like how this fight looks. Despite the things that Mob thinks about himself and others, he has learned to let people get close to him. Over the course of the show, he learns what it means to have friends and why exactly it's important. Mob especially learns the importance of having friends when you need them. Friends that will support you, teach you, and ground you. Because in the moments when you feel like you could destroy a whole city block, and when you're so emotional that you couldn't care less about how it'll impact the relationships you have with the people around, and there's nothing more you want than to isolate yourself, those are the moments when having friends who can get through to you and still care about you are so vitally important. Because it's only once your emotions are under control that you can finally accept the situation you may be in, along with the emotions you may be feeling. And ultimately, that is the true power of emotions, the ability to make connections with others. It's about how the knife is used, as Mob's mentor would say. Meaning emotions can cause damage to relationships, but they can also build much deeper and more meaningful relationships than what would be possible had they been absent. So build those relationships with each other, find friends who will be there for you, and learn to accept your emotions without letting them control you. And please, go watch Mob Psycho 100.
Boom, splat, stab me in the back, I'm bruised, bash, threw me to the curb like loose trash, left me in the past like who's that?